The UDR CAST is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDR CAST, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDR CAST encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDR CAST. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. Welcome everybody. Today we have Sara A from Regina. Sara, good to have you here. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I met Sara a few years ago. I think it's coming on 4 years now, back in Regina. I spent about a year working out in Regina, and I had the pleasure of doing some book work with Sara in the 12-step fellowship. We've stayed connected, relatively connected. There was a bit of a gap in time there where we weren't really connected, but she is working so hard at carrying the message out there and just, helping change lives. So I'm really happy to have Sara on today. Sara, what I'd like to do is kind of go back to the beginning of time. I know you have 2 years today, not birthday today, but you have 2 years recovery in right now. And you've been in recovery for about 6 years. So let's walk through the early parts of your life and kind of tell your story a little bit. Like, how was your growing up? A lot of people have trauma that really drove. But from what I remember, you weren't terribly affected by deep-rooted trauma from your family, but you definitely had some of the issues that families have. Can you walk us through your life as a young person into your teenage years a little bit?
Yeah, sure. When I was listening to you talk about trauma, you're right. On the surface, I wouldn't have said that I had trauma growing up. I had what I considered a really normal childhood in a small town. I grew up in Strathmore, Alberta, and I had a stepfather from the age of 5, and he was an alcoholic, but I didn't actually know that because he didn't drink in the house. He didn't drink in the home. So, when I first got into recovery, I was a little bit confused how I could have ended up this way. But in hindsight, and as I've continued to do some deeper work in the Adult Child of Alcoholics program, I realized there actually was some emotional trauma that took place in my life. And it was actually from a really early age. My biological dad passed away when I was 3 years old from cancer. And looking back at my early life from, birth until about 5 years old, the amount of emotional chaos and pain and grief that was in my home and that my mother was going through as a result of the death of my dad. Today, I think it would be hard for me to say that didn't affect me. It affected me deeply as a child who has no context for what's happening around me, but I can sense feelings of my caregivers, to realize that, my mom was experiencing fear, grief. She was unavailable for me emotionally because she was taking care of my dying father. So, I look back and I do think that caused trauma, but I couldn't connect to that trauma for a very long time because I didn't even have any memories of my biological father.
So you bring up some really good points. The first point that I would like you to, keep open to is when I say recovery, I mean recovery from, yes, the substance, but also more so the spiritual malady. Like you and I are pretty clear on the spiritual malady is the actual problem. So
Mhm.
feel free to share on whatever it is that you're recovering from. And then to trauma, like when we hear the word trauma, it's almost like this big headline where terrible shit had to happen to somebody. But the reality of what trauma is it's not really like big, always really terrible things that happen to an individual, although that can be the case. From what I'm hearing from you, your empath skills or sensitivity was pretty strong even as a child. And that empath ability to feel the feelings and feel other people's pain and other people's emotions and these kind of things, that actually affects us, right? So by the sounds of it, it's already affecting you from a young age, hey?
Yeah. And if I can share briefly how I realized what an impact that had on me, it was when I was in recovery. I went to go see a body talk therapist. One of the things that she does is, you put up your arm and she's placing pressure on your arm and you're to resist the pressure. You're trying to hold your arm at a certain level and resist her pressing down on the arm. And she will ask you open-ended yes or no questions. And the theory is that your body stores memory, and that even though intellectually in my mind, I may believe something, the body knows the truth. And so I went to go see this therapist, and she was asking, we were trying to find the source of my trauma because I didn't have any trauma as far as I was concerned. I don't remember the death of my dad, and I had a normal childhood. And as she was asking, she's asking, was Sarah's trauma before the age of 5, yes or no? And when it's true, when it's yes, like my arm would fall. And even though I'm trying to resist the pressure, my arm would fall. So we kept doing this. And it traced all the way back to 5 months old. Was the source of Sarah's trauma before the age of 6 months? And she said, and my arm went down. Yes. And I was really skeptical and confused because I thought, okay, how can I have trauma before the age of 6 months? Like, I'm a baby. Like, how could I have trauma? What could have happened to me? And as I was driving home from that appointment, I'm thinking, I know when my dad died, I was about to turn 3. But you know what? I don't actually know when he got sick. I don't know when that happened, how long he was sick for. I don't know. So I actually called my mom, who I'm not very close to, which we'll get into later, I guess. But I called my mom and I said, Mom, how old was I? When did you find out Daddy Simon was sick? And she said, well, you were born in August of 85. And we found out that your dad was terminal in December of 85. And I was 5 months old. And you can imagine the shift in our lives, like a nuclear bomb had dropped on our family because he was going to die and there was nothing we could do about it. And suddenly everything I think changed. And I think that my little spiritual self, because I do believe that when we're babies, we come here and we're closer to God. And then we move farther away from God as we go into the intellect and the ego. But when I was 5 months old, I knew something shifted, and it changed the course of my life.
Wow. I totally believe that 100%. And I also like that you had mentioned that when we're babies and we're young, we're closer to God. And as the ego asserts itself through the 5 senses, what we see, feel, taste, touch, and experience, we start getting further away from God and start getting into the world of the material type belief systems. And I think in the program where it says, God as we understood him, we're trying to surrender to this God as we understood him. I believe what the book is talking about is we used to understand God when we were little. We're trying to get back to that. We're trying to undo everything that we've learned, right? Letting go of these old ideas, this kind of thing and this kind of thing. And so anyway, let's keep walking through your life. So, as you're moving along in life, can you just pick it up where you left off and keep on going?
Well, yeah. So when I was so my dad passed away, obviously, and my mom remarried really quickly. And again, growing up, I wouldn't have given much thought to that. I didn't really put the time frame together, but my mom remarried by the time I was 4. And she remarried really quickly to a guy that she had met through a friend she waitressed with. That became my stepfather for the next 11 years of my life. And he was an alcoholic gambler. He worked in Fort McMurray. He was a pipe fitter from New Brunswick. He was a good man, but he was addicted, and he was an alcoholic. And although he never abused us, physically, he had the disease of alcoholism. So you never knew what you were going to get when he came home. If he came home and he was high, he was happy and he was your friend and he was, letting you stay up watching movies and, making jokes with you. But if he came home and he was irritable, restless, and discontent, he was slamming cupboard doors and swearing and, just making a big scene. And that type of instability affected me as a child, in terms of a lot of confusion about emotions, a lot of fear. I remember one time my sister and he had come home. My mom worked 2 jobs because he gambled away our money all the time. And so my mom was working all the time. And my sister and he came home one time. He was mad at some attendant at Canadian Tire. And he was just unloading on the cupboard doors and slamming them and throwing things. And me and my sister were hiding under our bed, So even though he never touched us physically, there was a lot of fear and a lot of terror when he would get angry.
Yeah. And again, the body memory and the deep psychological pain and escapism that's happening in the subconscious that's affecting you, right? And that shit carries right through our lives till today even, right? Wow, that's pretty. I could almost feel that. I could almost feel being present there in that moment, and I felt my heart rate jump up. That was pretty wild. Anyway, so as you kind of are experiencing untreated alcoholism, and you're, unbeknownst to you or anybody, even including your mom, you're getting affected, and this is part of the illness, and
Yeah.
sometimes the alcoholic themselves isn't even the sickest person. I've been told that sometimes the Al-Anons, the people around them, get so much sicker. So as you kind of walk through your life, how is your mom reacting to this? Is she protecting you? Is she having talks with you? What was her take in this?
Yeah. It is true that if you look at my first step 4 I ever wrote, I had way more resentment towards my mom, who wasn't the alcoholic, than towards my alcoholic stepdad. And the reason being, what I experienced as a kid was, he was Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But I really liked him when he was happy, because he was fun and he'd, let us stay up late and he'd let me drive the car on the back roads and stuff, So there was that loving, kind, gentle, humorous side to him that made me pity him when he was enraged or angry. It made me, I was afraid of him, but I gave him excuses for that behavior. And part of the reason why I gave him excuses was because my mom was always so angry at him. So what I saw from my mom growing up was somebody who despised my stepdad. He would come home, and I realize now he was trying to make up for harms done. He'd come home and buy her something, and she'd get more mad and tell him to take it back. But of course, as a kid, I didn't understand that. I didn't know why she was mad. I didn't know why she told him to take it back. I know now it's because he was out there spending our money on gambling irresponsibly, and buying her something new wasn't making up for it. It was actually increasing her stress. And as I said earlier, she was working 2 jobs to try and keep up with everything. So, my mom was the over responsible Al Anon, trying to hold the family together, trying to clean up after his mistakes. And as a result, she was not only emotionally unavailable, she was angry. And, we never talked about it either. My mom grew up in a time where it's not okay to talk to children about what you're feeling. It's not appropriate. And she tried to act as if everything was okay. But the thing is, children can sense when everything's not okay. I'll give an example. She slept on the couch most of my childhood. Now, she told us the reason that she did that was because of back issues. As a kid, I want to believe what my parent is telling me. So, when I question her, why are you sleeping on the couch? And she tells me back issues, I believe her. But in hindsight, it's like there is this suspicion inside me that says, that's funny. I didn't realize your back hurt you that bad, and oh, I didn't realize that the couch would be more comfortable than your bed. And I come to realize, she was sleeping out there because she didn't want to sleep in the same room as my stepdad, you know? So on a deeper level, on a spiritual level, I'm sensing dysfunction. I'm sensing malice. I'm sensing pain. But intellectually, I'm being told it's not about that's not real. So what I learned is not to trust my own perceptions.
And like, wow, that is some deep shit. And that is so true. The energy and intuition of a child to really feel what's going on, and then for you to be told something different that goes against your intuition, which would cause like deep confusion deep down inside you. When you start creating that kind of turmoil within yourself through the experience of working with many hundreds of alcoholics doing step fives, that's kind of the basis of why we drink and do drugs, is because we've never been able to be who we truly are, guided by that spirit or that intuition or that truth or that authenticity, because so many things on the outside of us are being told to us, such as societal belief systems, billboards, TVs, all of these things that tell us things to the contrary. And then we end up intellectually believing these things, and we don't ever keep that intuition sharpened. And then as we get older, it's totally dull, and we're just kind of going along trying to live this life the best we can with no real sense of direction. And then the direction comes because of what society tells us, right? Get this job, get this man, get this woman, do these things, get the white picket fence, and you're going to be happy. But fuck, most of us, it never really makes us happy. So, the way you explain that was pretty amazing.
When I hear you talk about that, it reminds me of Gabriel Mate, who's an addiction specialist. He was somebody who worked out in Vancouver, and he has that book, The Realm of the Hungry Ghost. And the hungry ghost, to me, is, and how he describes it, is disconnected from my true self and always longing, always looking outside myself for something. And yeah, the circumstances in childhood, not being guided on an emotional, spiritual level, set me up to become a hungry ghost.
Yeah. And even if you had just gotten like all of the love from your mom and communication and mostly love, just assurance, that just goes so far. And that's a huge thing, I think, why First Nations people, a lot of us, are very disconnected from this world, because through the residential school, kind of off topic, but it kind of relates, through the residential school and all of the traumas that, First Nations people have experienced, a lot of them didn't get any love. And then generations upon generations are having more kids, and the love isn't transmitted. And then the sickness perpetuates itself to the point where people need to blot out everything with substance. And then it becomes very, very difficult to get sober for my brothers and sisters, because there's so much trauma deep down, and there's so much lack of love, and it's just a difficult road that I just have so much empathy for First Nations people in that area, and I am one, right? And I can attest to some of that experience. But anyway, back on track here.
Well, if I can just interject into that too, First Nations sure have experienced that. And, if I look at my own family, even though we're not First Nations, I've come to realize that, like, my mom was sick before she ever married an alcoholic. Like, she was actually quite unwell. One of her things is that emotional closed offness. She couldn't give love to us. Now, I can say, well, she didn't give love to us because she was too busy with the alcoholic. But this is the family disease of alcoholism. It affects everybody, right? But she was sick before. I suspect that she was also not shown love. Her dad is a German Russian who was forced out of Russia during the Stalin years. And so many of her uncles and aunts, they just disappeared. They either starved to death or were put in internment camps, and they disappeared, and nobody ever heard from them again. And we don't know how they died. And her dad made it out of Russia and came here and immigrated here. But that's a trauma that never left him. And that trauma, then he passed down to his children, who then passed down to me. So generational trauma across the board for all cultures, and how it manifests. We want to talk about the substance, but the substance is the solution to the spiritual trauma that's being passed down from family to family.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, let's keep going through your teenage years, and how did life treat you through the teenage years, through social interaction with your peers and with the opposite sex and these kind of things. Can you keep walking us along?
Yeah. So part of the story that I haven't talked about is I have an older sister who's 5 years older than me, and we were incredibly close. So despite all the dysfunction between my stepdad and my mom, my sister was so loving and nurturing, and she was essentially like a mother figure to me. She really cared a lot for me and nurtured me. She was where I got my nurturing and love from. When I was about 14, because she was 5 years older than me, she moved away to college. Now, again, if you would have asked me in early recovery what that had to do with anything, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. But I remember doing this exercise in detox, actually. They had us do this exercise where they tell this story, imagine you're dying of cancer, right? And at every stage, when you first find out, and then, when you first start chemo, and then, when you're in the hospital bed and you're being told it's your last breath, you have to let some stuff go. So you first write out, all these things, material things that are important to you, relationships that are important to you. And then at every stage of the story, you let some stuff go because you have to, right? And then the exercise is what's left at the end of your life? What is the one thing that's left? And when I did this exercise in detox, the one thing that was left when I died was my sister. So that's how important she was to me, in my story. And so translate that now back to when she went off to university. She leaves me and she goes to university. And I'm left at home with my angry workaholic mother and my addicted stepfather. And I'm alone. And how that manifests itself, I can say now, is in codependent relationships. So now I'm not getting the love and nurturing at home, and I know I'm not going to get it. I got to find it somewhere else. And that's when I started with my relationship addiction. So I started dating around that time. And I was what I like to call a serial monogamist. It's like I'd meet a guy, and within 2 weeks, I'm like devoted to this person. Like, they're my soulmate or something, And I would be in these relationships, and I was never single longer than 2 weeks at a time. And usually the truth is I was never single. I always had somebody. As the relationship started to fall apart, which I'll get into the various reasons it did, as relationships would fall apart, I'd have somebody new lined up and ready to go, because there was no way I was going to go without my drug, which was the attention, affection, and love that I was so desperately seeking.
Yeah, you put a lot of pieces together. I'm really stoked at your depth of knowledge on putting these pieces together, because that is just so helpful for you as you move on helping other women. So skipping along, let's get into shortly before you come into recovery. How did you find recovery, and what was your beginning experiences of recovery, and what are we looking at?
Yeah, so that codependent relationship addiction carried on into my late teens, into my 20s. I actually got married at the age of 19 to a guy I knew for 3 months, and that ended obviously a few years later. And I had this predictable pattern in the relationships. It would always start out as like, romance and love and infatuation. And every 2 years, I was burning those relationships to the ground. So I was divorced once already by the age of 23. Then I got married again. I actually ended up pregnant with a guy here in Regina that I had only been dating for about 2 months. I was on birth control and I was going to university, and I was really ambitious, like lots of alcoholics are, because I'm out to prove something. Like I'm like Bill W. in the Big Book, right? Like who takes off on his motorbike with his life savings to become a stock genius. I'm like that too, where it's like, I'm not growing up. I'm not going to stay in my small town and marry, one of these people I went to high school with. Like I'm out of here. So, I went off to university in Regina, and I have dreams of a master's and lots of, high ambition. And then I end up pregnant. And it was like my world just shattered, because all my dreams and fantasies based on self-will were suddenly going a different direction. I had a brief moment of sanity when I found out I was pregnant. And I said to this guy, we don't really even know each other that well. So maybe, yeah, I'm going to go through with this pregnancy, because I just knew for myself I wasn't going to abort. And I said, maybe we should just continue dating as if we would have, despite having the baby. We don't have to move in, don't have to do any of that, and just see where our relationship goes. And, if it doesn't work out, fine. We still brought a beautiful life into the world and we can co-parent, right? But not be in relationship. And that was kind of sane thinking. But, you used to say to me all the time, water finds its own level. I wasn't with the healthiest guy here, right? He himself was codependent. And so that was like not going to fly for him. We have to do what society says. We have to get married now. We have to get married. We have to move in. We've got to do the whole family thing for show, right? We got to keep up with these Joneses. And so we did, so I did. And I was married to him then for 7 years, and we had another child. So now I have 2 children with this man who, prior to having kids with him, I'd known him for 2 months.
Were you using substances through these periods of time? When did you start using substances? And looking back at it, I guess now, what was the main reason you were using them?
I always used socially. I smoked pot, I did shrooms, I did those sorts of things at parties, right? Like most college people. And I just started that even in high school. But when I moved to Regina and I was living on my own, whenever I didn't have a guy sleeping over, I had trouble sleeping. And so I actually started taking Gravol to sleep. So even though Gravol is supposed to be for nausea, it knocks me out. So I started medicating this loneliness that I would feel at nighttime if I was by myself. I started actually medicating it with Gravol. And then, fast forward, like that, drinking, marijuana use, Gravol, like that was kind of the thing. But then fast forward to when I have 2 kids and I'm married. Okay. And I find out later that the guy I married, not only was he codependent, but he's got an alcohol problem, and he comes from an alcoholic family. Right. Well, we're fighting all the time. but I can't do my usual MO and just ditch the guy because I have 2 kids with him, right? So it's not that simple. It's a little more complicated now for me, right? I can't run. So that's when my use really picked up. So that's when I really started needing escape from my daily living because it was intolerable and I didn't want to be there. I was resentful that I was a mother because that wasn't part of my master plan. I was resentful that I ended up with this guy because that wasn't part of my master plan. I couldn't see how any of my decisions or choices had led to any of this. And so life had dealt me a bad card, and I was getting more and more depressed by the day. So as that continued, I started using cough syrups to knock myself out, like Dayquil NyQuil was my favorite. I drink half a bottle of that just to pass out so that I didn't have to deal with anything. I started smoking pot. I liked how it made me feel. It made me feel less stressed because that's the thing. I had become my mother. I was angry and stressed all the time. I hated my partner. I was in despair 24/7. So I started smoking pot because it helped to relax me, but my use picked up really fast. And it went from, oh, I'll just smoke a little on the weekends, or, oh, I'll just smoke after I put the kids to bed. It started to progress to the point where I became so dependent on marijuana that I had to get high before I woke my kids up to take them to daycare because just dealing with getting my kids ready for daycare was so overwhelming to me that I would be angry and reactive and having meltdowns.
Holy smoke. So I know your main unmanageability drug was marijuana, right? Not to mention all of the NyQuils and all of these kind of things, and, definitely addict behavior. And we use the substance because we're restless, irritable, discontented. That's the bottom line. But the thing with marijuana, because it's so socially acceptable, even in the 12-step fellowship programs, there is people using marijuana and thinking that it's okay. I am of the school that it's elimination of all mind and mood altering substances. Creator or God's got a job to do for us, and God can't do God's job when there's mind and mood altering substances in the way. And we can't get that full connection, my opinion, and from the experience of the hundreds that I've worked with, that just blocks it off. What's your take on this marijuana thing being okay? And did you have that thought for a while too? And what's your take on it now?
Yeah, I love that you bring this up because this is where the crux of my story lies is my marijuana use. So, my life was unmanageable. I was hitting rock bottom in many different ways. And I had a friend suggest I go for my marijuana use. I also had a therapist tell me that I needed to go to treatment and detox. And the whole time I'm minimizing marijuana because this is a socially acceptable drug. People tell me it's not even addictive. So to me, I can't accept the proposition that I'm addicted to marijuana or that it is the cause of my problems, or adding to my problems. I knew I had a problem with my husband and my kids, but I had no idea that I was an addict, and I refused to accept that. So, I was desperate enough that I went to the meetings, but I was convinced I didn't have a problem with marijuana. I had a problem with codependency and relationships. So I'd say the word drug and I'd replace it with the word codependency in my mind, right? So that I could stay there, so that I could relate, and so that I could get some help. But I couldn't quit pot and I didn't want to. And I even had somebody once tell me that pot wasn't really a drug because it's not addictive, especially nowadays when the hard drugs like crystal meth and fentanyl are all the rage. It's like, I'm doing this little baby marijuana drug. What are you even doing here? And that actually helped my disease carry on a little longer because it was just helping me justify, right? But as things continued to get worse, like spiritually and emotionally at home, I did want a solution, but I wasn't willing to put down the pot because it wasn't the problem. So I kept seeking, but I didn't know where I was going. I was really directionless. And this was great because it was like a geographical change, but instead of from city to city, it was from program to program. It was like, oh yeah, I'll go get a sponsor and work the steps because alcohol is not my thing anyways. I can put that down easy. right? But I can still smoke pot. I've heard of people doing the marijuana maintenance program. And so I can do this guilt free. And that was my logic at the time.
So as you finally enter these programs, what was the big draw, and when did you realize that you had to eliminate weed? Did you go through, another rock bottom or several rock bottoms and still rationalize this weed use, and kind of other people are helping you rationalize this by the sounds of it? When did you finally realize, and what were some of the main things as you go through this recovery journey that really were turning points, or at the time you didn't know, but looking back you're like, fuck, that was a lesson that kicked in later? Because I find often in these programs, the information that comes at us, there's so much of it, but the pieces of the puzzle don't fit till down the road. So as you're getting inundated with pieces of the puzzle, can you tell us when they start putting themselves in place?
Yeah. Early recovery, like when I first got into, I did get a sponsor, and that sponsor really helped me just to start at least getting my life manageable again. Right. So even though I was relapsing on marijuana a lot, she stuck with me. She helped me sort out relationship issues, parenting issues, things like that. And what was happening was I was starting to get a glimpse of what a good life could be like. And that was important because it kept me there. What happened was I only got so well. So I would get a little well, yes, some aspects of my life started to sort themselves out. Things were starting to get a bit more manageable. I eventually left my husband. I did file for divorce. And there were some miracles that happened during that course, that I believe today could not have happened if I wasn't at least trying to do the steps. Like I was trying to do step 3. I was actually willing, and I was giving effort into doing the program. But because I couldn't let go of marijuana, and I still hadn't accepted the basic truth that the way I use marijuana qualifies me just like an alcoholic, right? I have the phenomenon of craving described in the book, and the mental obsession when I'm sober that leads me back to the first toke. Because I couldn't identify with that, I kept relapsing. So I'd take, a couple steps forward, and then I'd take a step back. I'd take a couple steps forward, then I'd take a step back. One of the pieces that was important was when I met you. In recovery in Regina, nobody was taking their sponsees, or at least nobody I had run into, was taking their sponsees through the book one-on-one. The way the steps were being done here was all through step studies. So in big groups of like 30 people, everybody takes turns reading, and you just kind of wing it like that. And I had never been part of one of those to begin with. I kept trying to do the steps by myself, and that wasn't working. So when I met you, you suggested that you would take me through the steps and you would actually read the book with me. And when you pointed out the phenomenon of craving and the mental obsession, that was the first time I had ever talked about that. And by this time, I was already in 12-step fellowships for about 2 years, going to meetings regularly. So although I didn't stay sober from the time I met you, and we can talk about that later, that never left me, because now I have the knowledge of what the book says about what qualifies me as an addict, right? I'm not listening to people's opinions in the room and, their stories and trying to somehow relate to them. I'm hearing from this book how I can diagnose myself as an addict.
So as you have these light bulbs turn on, you can't unlearn this. So now you're realizing the solution lies within the book, but you carried on. I remember you disconnected from me a little bit there, and we didn't have much communication. But then later on, probably 2 years later, really, you started getting back in touch with me. And now this last year or more, we've been constantly in touch. So as you keep walking through recovery life in Regina, what are you hearing and what are you seeing and what's happening in your mind as you're going along? Because I know from my experience in Regina and other places that the message that's being carried in the rooms is half the message. It's the mess. And a lot of people are not getting well. And the reason why I've been so impactful in the recovery community is because I'm telling it like it is out of the book and through my experience and through this experience of the hundreds of sponsees that I worked with. And I see many of them get recovery. And it's not based on opinion or the mess, it's based out of the message in the book. So how did this message in the book slowly start creeping in to where you are now as a message carrier?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be fair, I think when you came around Regina and were working with me, I think you were only 2 years sober, and you've changed a lot since then, and your interpretation of the book even, I think, is changed a lot. And likewise for me, I had a little more growing up to do too before I was going to be able to put together what was in this book and understand it at a deeper level. What that meant for me was, how we ended up separating was I called you one time in self-pity about my son. I was single parenting at the time. And I was really looking for, again, that emotional security, that nurturing. I was looking for that love, that it's going to be okay, Sarah, that type of message. And I didn't get that from you. I got the, get off the pity pot, stop feeling sorry for yourself message. Now, again, at that time, you're 2 years into this, maybe now you would deal differently with that. But also I'm different. And I realize that my expectations for somebody else to validate me, right? I had you on this pedestal like an authority figure, right? Where the only reason I'm doing this recovery is to please Bill. I need his approval. And as long as and that's codependency still, right? That's still me looking for my validation outside of myself. So as long as I was doing that, right, I was setting myself up to be hurt because who knows what was going on with you that day? Maybe you had an off day. Maybe you're just sick of listening to me whine every day. That gets tiring on a person, right? What happened to me when we stopped talking was I ran away. I ran away in shame because I'm still sick enough that even the love and approval of my sponsor, if I don't get it, that'll send me back out, so what happened after was I did end up, because you and I stopped talking, I did end up getting a new sponsor. And she was the one who really helped me work on the codependency. The idea that as long as I kept putting people in positions of authority over me, like you're better than me and you're less than me, what I was doing was living in that pendulum of the ego state, right? Pride in reverse. So what I needed to do was see my humanness, see my sameness, and not just in the bad stuff, but in the good stuff, to see that I have a right to be here just as much as anybody. And that even though I make mistakes, God still loves me, that this isn't about performance and being the best at the steps and best at recovery and making Bill happy. Like, this is about learning to love myself. And so as she taught me how to do that, and she did it by just giving me that confidence to validate myself, right? Yeah, my perspective started to change. And I was able, the door to humility was open just a little bit more, right? Where I could stop beating myself up and living in fear and shame. And I could start saying, I'm doing the best I can. And as long as I keep moving forward, all will be well. And it's going to be okay. There is no failure here. There's just learning.
So as we look at that timeline, everything is happening exactly as it's supposed to, in a sense. I come around and, kind of drop some seeds. Your resentments basically still take you away and you run away, which is codependency. You hook up with a new sponsor who's way more focused in those deeper defects that I probably would have never been able to help you in. But the seeds I planted, she's planting new seeds, and you keep walking through your journey, right? And you start having these, what do we talk about in the program, in the big book, little alterations in your way of living and thinking. And then you start making adjustments and you start seeing the truth, because we live in self-delusion. And as you start seeing the truth and making these adjustments, things start to look different and you start to feel different and you're feeling better and you're starting to love yourself. And then you keep moving on in your recovery. And so keep on going along.
You're totally right. The small alterations in daily living started to change my thinking. And even to the point where forgiveness became possible for me. Once I learned to forgive myself easier, right? And be a little gentler on myself, suddenly I could do that for others. I could actually move towards love and tolerance of other people. I couldn't be loving and tolerant of other people and their defects and their sundry of issues, because I couldn't stand that in myself. And me not standing it in myself was really pride, because it's like my denial that I'm just a human. I'm nothing special. Like I'm just a person, you know? And so, yeah, that sort of stuff really started to change how I worked my program. But it all came full circle, like it all led me back to the book actually. But now when I read the book, I read it differently. I didn't read it like a set of, rules where some authority figure is saying, you better do this or you're going to fail. And the tone of it changed. The tone became one of empowerment and uplifting hope. And you see, the book didn't change. What changed was how I thought about it. What changed is how I interpreted it. What changed was my perception of it. Even the word selfish, when I first came around, and you hear a lot in the rooms, oh, you're just, self-centered, selfish. And my brain hears that. And because of how I grew up with an angry mother who called me self-centered and selfish, when I hear that word, I recoil at that word and I want to hide. And I want to I want to fight it. I either want to hide or I want to fight it. But even that word now means something different to me, selfish, self-centered. What it means is caught up in my own mind. That's it. In my own story that I'm telling myself. Doesn't mean I'm bad, wrong, and defective. It means that I'm believing a story that may or may not be true, that's in my mind.
Yeah, I remember hearing that word selfish too when I first came in, and I had a great disdain for that. And I'm like, I'm not selfish. You don't have any idea what I've given to my family and other people and how I've helped all these people. And once I got an alteration in the way I looked at that word, everything changed. And also, just like you, when I was in the book to begin with, I was actually resistant of most of the things in there, especially God, because I had so much self-sufficiency that I didn't want any of this shit. The thing with me is I had no choice. I had tried everything else and I had nowhere else to go. And they talk about the program being the last house on the block, and there wasn't another house on the block. And thank God, because as I went through the literature and I saw selfish, but when I got to step 4 and 5, I realized how selfish I actually was. I thought I was great in relationships, but I had never had a relationship with anybody in my life, really, except myself. And these revelations, that step 4 and 5 stuff, when I first did it, just changed everything. And it actually gave me a lot of hope. It gave me hope that, okay, you're not just a piece of shit, for one. There are reasons why you're like this. And so I got excited. And I also was excited that I could maybe change. I didn't know how this was all going to work, but I got some uplifting hope. And like yourself, the literature started to change pretty much from step 4 on for me.
So I want to say on this topic of how our perception changes and then we see it differently. When I first read the book, all I was picking out was the stuff that was condemning me, okay, as an alcoholic. The stuff that I missed, that's all throughout the book, are the gentle messages. For example, it talks about in step 11, in the 12 and 12, it talks about how, sometimes we'll be obstinate to pray. will be struck with a rebellion so sickening that we just won't pray. And I've had that many times in my recovery. And, what happens to me is when I get quote unquote disconnected from my spiritual higher power, when I don't feel that connection, I want to instantly go into shame. But the book then goes on to say we shouldn't be hard on ourselves when this happens. We just resume prayer as soon as it's possible. And that's a gentle message. That's saying if you want to hold yourself on a cross and you want to martyr yourself over not doing this program perfectly, you can do that. But it's not going to help you get back to God. In fact, it's going to actually block you getting back to God.
Very, very awesome point. And there are a lot of gentle messages in there. And that's why it's so important to, have a sponsor too. Most sponsors are pretty good at balancing the gentleness with the firmness, and we got to try to help pick people up, right? I know me as a sponsor, and like you said, when I sponsored you, I was 2 years and I was more rigid than I am now. I've learned how to balance the love and the tolerance with a little bit of the rigidity, and really try to help empower people. And that only comes through experience, right? So as we're sitting here today, maybe in this last year, what's happened in the last year of your recovery? You got 2 years recently, and this last year's been a game changer also. Talk about the game changers and how you are where you're at now, and what kind of things are happening in your life now with the program or in general.
Yeah. So as I reconciled with my higher power, and the way I did that again was coming to realize my higher power loves me, and I'm the only obstacle to feeling that love. My mind is the only obstacle. As that happened, there was a shift in my energy. And it was really fascinating because all of a sudden people were attracted to me. People who I wouldn't have expected started talking to me and wanting to be around me and wanting to spend time around me. And this was happening in spite of myself. I wasn't out seeking their company, right? In recovery. I was just going to meetings and sharing what was changing, the rearrangements that were happening within me. And suddenly people were attracted to that. And it was really kind of weird. I had never sponsored really. You tried getting me to sponsor. I did a little bit here and there, but it didn't work out. And all of a sudden, last January, 4 gals within a month, 4 different gals asked me to sponsor them. And I was kind of really caught off guard. Of course, I was struck with fear and things like that. But I talked it over with my sponsor, and and I felt confident in the sense that I felt like, it's not a big deal. All I have to do is share my experience, strength, and hope, my knowledge of the literature and the steps, and trust in God, and everything will be okay. So I started sponsoring, and this was like a massive shift for me in my recovery, because what it did was it actually validated for me all the work that I had been doing, even the first few years when I was relapsing. It was the promise is coming true. We won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. In fact, God has made my greatest defects my greatest assets, in that now I can help other people. And that was where my effectiveness lied. The help that I was able to give and offer to these gals was strictly based on sheer honesty and openness about my own experience. It wasn't coming from a place of, oh, I'm an authority and I know better than you because I've been in longer than you. It was like a total relating, oh yeah, I still can think like that. And oh, I remember that time that happened. And I was able to really deepen my intimacy with other human beings through sponsorship. And that was when COVID first happened. And I got to tell you, that was the best, that first year of COVID, because I was sponsoring and I was active in doing my step 12 work. It was an awesome year. It was awesome. I didn't feel isolated at all.
And I love that, and I know most people that do the steps, most don't actually go into the sponsorship realm. And I always say the 12 steps will give you a lot, but the one aspect of the 12th step will give you everything. And it's a game changer. And when you look at the steps and what they actually are, a lot of it is self-examination, right? When you're asking God in step 3 and you say the step 3 prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self, build with me, do with me as thou wilt, take away these difficulties. That's all in respect to self-reflection and going inside, because the problem is self. My difficulties are my defects that cause my difficulties. And God, build with me, do with me as thou wilt, take these away and rebuild me to the best version that I can be. Then you look at step 4, which is all self-reflection. The truth, though, not my delusional version. And then when we do the 5, we're doing it with God and somebody else is showing us the truth. Step 6 is about the action to change with a lot of self-reflection. Step 7, same thing. Step 8, step 9, it's all the same. And what does sponsorship do? What better way to look at yourself, talk to yourself, and listen to yourself through another human being that is also driven by the same instincts that you are, that have many of the same defects and the deep-rooted fears and trying to fill these inside holes with things on the outside, but also opening your heart in a way where you can accept their love and you open their heart through this work and they can accept yours. And then it's just like, that's the God dope. That's the God dope. So for me, sponsorship has fundamentally changed me as a human being. It allowed me actually to change my whole career, which was scary at the time, but it changed me so deeply inside that I gave up my construction management career and building businesses to help other addicts and alcoholics. But I think more importantly, help people with the spiritual malady, medicate that with a higher power and find authentic self. And that's what I endeavor to do now. I'm really stoked and happy to hear what you're doing. How are things going in Regina? I know you started a big book study that you've had to stop because Self-Will was kind of running the show. But you're doing some meetings in your own backyard. What are the things that you're doing now, and how are they impacting people?
Before I speak to that, I'd like to just say one other thing about the sponsorship, if I can. What I've come to realize, this spiritual malady is about connection. In early childhood, as those emotional traumas happened, I became disconnected from myself, from God, and from others. And I created a false self. And the false self, the ego, was meant to protect me. But eventually it becomes the boomerang that turns around and tears me to shreds. And so the thing about sponsorship, I see a lot of people who have worked, maybe a set of steps 10 years ago, maybe they've worked one more recently, but they don't want to sponsor. And when I see that, what I see is somebody who is going to settle for just as much recovery as gets them by. And it talks about that in 6 and 7, in the 12 and 12, about getting on with the business of being self-satisfied. Well, I'm better now, so I'm good. But the problem with that I experienced, and I've experienced it, is when I rest on my laurels, I'm not actually standing still. I'm actually moving backwards. It's grow or go back. It's not grow or stay still. So the people who come in and they work their steps for themselves, but they never do the step 12 work, or they think the step 12 work is just chairing a meeting here or there, and they don't get into sponsorship. It's just a detriment to their own spiritual growth, because it means that they'll never continue to grow closer to their creator and their fellows. And that's where that God dope is. Like, it's about intimacy. And my number one fear as an addict is intimacy. I don't want to be vulnerable with other human beings because I'm scared they'll hurt me, or I'll look stupid. But it's in the willingness to be honest and vulnerable with other human beings and to be humbled in relationship with other human beings that all the growth is. So if I am still walling myself off from getting close to people in recovery, which I can do by just coming to meetings and working my own sets of steps, right? I'm never going to grow in that intimate connection with my creator and others. For me, the continuous changes in perception of myself and the continuous growth comes from actually seeing my shortcomings in sponsorship.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree. Because they are us and it holds us accountable and we keep moving forward. I love what you're saying. I couldn't agree more. So what's going on in your world nowadays? You know, we got about a couple more minutes before we shut her down. Tell us what's happening in your world nowadays and what kind of impact are you and your creator doing? I know you're making changes out there because we talk often. And I know other people that are around you are contacting me and telling me what a shining light you are out there, right? And it's a lonely fucking road. And I tell all my sponsees, when you carry this real message, it's a lonely fucking venture. But eventually the fellowship you actually crave does grow up about you. And I'm talking the fellowship of the spirit, right? The high water level recovery.
You know, what was happening to me is I'm going to a lot of meetings and I'm not hearing the message out of the book. I'm hearing a lot of people's morbid reflection, a lot of the same stories over and over again, and people who have been around a long time, but I mean, they must not be growing that much because they tell the same story at every meeting. And what that was doing was it was affecting my recovery because, you know, I have a friend, one of my pillars, who says, if you're the healthiest person in the room consistently over a long period of time, that's not good, right? Because that affects your recovery. You need to hear somebody who's more recovered than you every once in a while, right? To keep you growing. And so I was starting to get a little, you know, judgy, a little discontent. And of course, what pops up into my mind is the end of the chapter, The Vision for You, where it says, you know, see to it that your relationship with him is right and all good things shall come to pass for you and those amongst you, you know, and we'll meet and you'll surely meet some of us there in the fellowship of the Spirit. Some of us, and you were the one who pointed out to me a long time ago, and this was those seeds that you planted a long time ago when you went through the book with me that now have so much meaning to me, right? You said, Sarah, it says some of us. It doesn't say all of us, right? I can't expect that 100% of the meeting attendance at an AA meeting is going to be working this fellowship of the Spirit. Some of them are working the fellowship of tradition 3. I'm an alcoholic, so I belong here. And I know today for my own well-being and recovery, if I'm going to keep getting well and stay well, I've got to have a fellowship of the Spirit. And you know what? If there isn't one around me, I've got to create it. I've got to create it with God's help. So that's what I started doing. You know, I started meetings in my backyard during COVID, outdoors, so we could still meet when meetings were shut down, and people love them. You know, I was getting like 20 people at that meeting, and it was open to all fellowships. And so I'm doing that again now, but I'm doing it with the Fellowship of the Spirit readings that you started that group. And people, when I read the original manuscript, they're just blown away because they've never heard it before. You know, I have a guy who's 25 years sober, and he came on Sunday and he heard that original manuscript. He said, "Where did you get that from?" I said, "That's the manuscript. That's what Bill wrote. You know, that's what he wanted it to say." So yeah, so you know, I'm still sponsoring. I'm getting my sponsees to sponsor. So that's how we build a fellowship. You know, that's how we build a fellowship of the Spirit.
That is how. And it's a consistent, persistent commitment to change and persistent, consistent commitment to always bring the message. And I think for me, the biggest thing in my life in recovery has been consistency and persistency, and always just moving forward with the material in the book, sponsorship, and just carrying the message and not being influenced by what other people say or think about me. Because I remember when I was in Regina, people wouldn't even talk to me for the first 6 months. I was told to shut my mouth in a meeting in mid-share.
I was there at that meeting. I remember that meeting.
And I still remember that too. And I remember the grace with which I handled that. And
Totally.
that was not me, because I would never have done that. But carrying the message consistently and persistently, after that 6 months where no one would talk to me, I sponsored Mike, I sponsored you, I sponsored James, and people started noticing things. And then a lot of people were coming to me, asking me questions and being my friend. And that's the lonely road, right? There's a lot of judgment. If I'm okay with my pillars and I'm okay with God, it doesn't matter what other people think or say. I just keep working forward, and everything becomes my teacher, and I gain spiritual progress, not perfection. Right? It's not just progress, not perfection. That's kind of a weasel clause to just kind of keep acting the same way. But if I'm going to learn from every mistake or interaction or circumstance and try to gain in spiritual progress, not perfection, that's really what Bill meant by that line, right? So, Sarah, I was really stoked that you said yes, that you would do this podcast. And I am just so stoked that you are doing what you're doing out there, and that you've become the person that you are, just another soldier, another warrior in this world of recovery. And I know you've kind of changed your path in life because of what's happened on the deep inside of you. So Sarah, before we shut her down, would you like to have any closing words for, people out there that are trying to get sober, working program, or just anybody listening? Do you have any closing words before we let you go?
Yeah, I would say that my recovery is not my own. It's an accumulation of all the help I received from the people I chose to surround myself with in recovery. And, I was desperate enough to seek people with high level recovery, even though they were people who I wouldn't normally mix with, like Bill. And consistently, they were people who were spiritual and who were showing growth and change. So, if you're new or coming back and you're looking for help, surround yourself with people or get a sponsor who talks about the spiritual life and whose story changes, who's working it out fearlessly on the spiritual plane. Because if I choose somebody who seems safe or who tells the same story over and over again at the meetings, I might not get what I need. So seek out somebody who seems to be seeking God.
Awesome, Sarah. Awesome. Okay, well, that just about runs out our time. So I just want to thank you again for coming on. And, if anyone would like to get in touch with Sarah, you can send me an email. Send your email to bill@billward.life, and I can get you in touch with Sarah. You can also find me and what I'm doing on all platforms: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I have a bunch of recovery material, big book material on YouTube, and my website, billward.life. So thank you, everybody, for joining in, and look forward to the next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to the UDR CAST. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARD.life to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.